Good evening, testing. Testing. No, can we hear it yet? Oh yeah. We're just teasing, so just talk amongst yourselves until my voice drowns you out. And it's drowning and it's drowning. Hey, there we go. Friends, good evening. On this Wednesday evening, thank you for coming out today. If you've never been in this church building before, or haven't for a long time, you are most welcome. My name is Andrew. I'm the minister here at St. Stephen's. And without further ado, I'd like to bring to the stage the man who has flown in from South Australia this morning to come and speak with us and be interviewed, Henry Olonga. It's great to see you, Henry.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone.
Now, Henry, let me get this right, because you told me...
Just a random dude who says hi from the left over there.
He likes doing that. There he is. Now, I've got to get this right. You were born in Zambia. Your mother was Zimbabwean. Or is Zimbabwean. Your father is Kenyan.
That's right.
You grew up in Zimbabwe. In your cricketing career, you travelled to, I presume, most, if not all, of the top-tier cricketing nations.
Yep.
You then migrated to England, and then you travelled to Australia. So when you go through airports these days, do you get stopped a lot of customs and they go, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Zambia?
Well, I've been told I should never enter Australian politics for a start.
Yes.
But talking about immigration, I remember when I first arrived, and the gentleman who was looking at my passport probably hadn't seen too many Zimbabwean passports. It's very distinct and it's green. And he kept flicking through it ever so slowly. And eventually he spoke. He said, "Mr. Olonga, do you have any criminal convictions?" I said the first thing that came to my mind, I said, "I didn't know you needed one to get into Australia." Well, it works in Sydney. I was telling Andrew, I told that joke in South Australia. They didn't find it funny. So thank you for laughing.
Well done, Henry. It's good to have you.
You're a bit sharper. Yes.
There you go. So look, Henry, let's start at the very beginning and go to your early life growing up in Zimbabwe with your family. Tell us about what that was like.
Well, I was very young when I was born. That usually gets the crowd going. That just sets the tone for the rest of the evening as well, doesn't it? I was born in Lusaka, Zambia, as you mentioned. My mom and dad, I was born in 76, so I'm 46 years old this year, and turning 47. I have an older brother called Victor. He's 2 years older than me. He's actually always been 2 years older than me. And we lived in Lusaka for maybe 2 or so years after I was born. And then we moved to Nairobi, Kenya. And it was there that my mom noticed a few odd things. And one of the things that happened was she saw a few children running around who bore more than a passing resemblance to my brother and I. And so had to make some inquiries. So you've done a few weddings, haven't you?
Have.
You know there's that part, Andrew, where you say, "Is there anyone here who knows any lawful reason?" Yes. Well, my dad should have stuck his hand up. Because what happened was, that's a very familiar ringtone, I have to say. So what actually happened was, my mom noticed these children, and she made some inquiries and discovered that my dad had actually been married to another woman called Priska. And he'd actually had a few children over there. He'd had 10. Actually, he'd had 12. 2 died very young. And he just never mentioned it at any point. And he didn't divorce the first wife, by the way. But I guess it just never came up in conversation, so he didn't mention it. So you can imagine this bombshell confronting my mom. And so she, when it all came out, felt cheated, deceived, betrayed, all those things. and decided she couldn't stay in the marriage. So she fled to Zimbabwe, where she started her new life without us. She just left us there. And half of it I understand, because she didn't get any sympathy from her in-laws, my father's side of the family. She was in a foreign country, only to discover she was married to a bigamist. And so it was a terrible shock. Anyway, my dad tried to patch things up, but where do you even start, right? So he failed. But he did move to Zimbabwe with my brother and I, and set up camp in a city called Bulawayo. My mom moved to the capital city, which is called Harare, and we started life in this new country. So we arrived there in 1980. 1980 was a very important year in Zimbabwe's history, because Zimbabwe used to be called Rhodesia. And there was a war for about a decade, which started in the late 60s, I suppose, and ended towards the end of the 70s. And after that, there were free and fair elections, and a man called Robert Mugabe came to power. And Zimbabwe became an independent nation on the 18th of April in 1980. And so we arrived round about that time with all the tumultuous changes that were going on in the country. And from a young age, I started school. I went to a couple of day schools, and then I got sent off to boarding school. Around about the mid-80s, 1984, I think it was, I started at a school called Reps. Went there for 5 years, and then went to high school. And that was a school called Plumtree, and I was there for 6 years. So all of my junior schooling and high schooling was at a boarding school, and not only boarding school, but boys-only boarding schools.
Right, okay. So probably not many of us have that kind of experience, life at a boarding school. Can you tell us, I guess, a couple of things? Tell us what it was like, what sort of things happened at the school, what activities and what you were involved with. And then you told me that, this is part two of the question, when you...
Now, I'm a man. You assume I can multitask.
Yeah, you've got to keep up, Henry. That's the way to go. So, yeah, tell us about life at the school and what you did there. And also, you said something changed for you quite dramatically at the age of 16. So tell us about school and then 16.
Well, let me start with the type of education. The type of it was very British. So, we had really remarkably good teachers in both my junior school and high school. So not only were they very competent in their work, but they were also very versatile. So they could teach you geography, and then they could be coaching you how to throw a cricket ball or javelin or shot put or whatever. And I mention that because later on we lost a lot of those good teachers, and it was a noticeable difference that the replacements weren't as versatile and created a different type of student. The other thing I'll say is we used to have corporal punishment back in my day, and I tell you what, you learn very quickly when you've got corporal punishment that there are consequences to your actions, and if you break the rules, you get a spanking. We used to have the cane, and interestingly enough, there were rules around it, so that the headmaster or the teacher could only give you 6 of the best. And one of the funniest things I've thought about corporal punishment is, of course, because you got hit on the bum, and it used to leave marks. And I found it hilarious that the white boys used to go from red to blue to black, and all the colors of the rainbow. And we used to stay the same color, but you used to call us colored people. So I didn't quite understand. So anyway, corporal punishment was a big part of my schooling because, of course, there were severe consequences to breaking rules. And the only reason I mention that is because now we have a very softly approach. And I'm not saying everything was okay or acceptable about corporal punishment. There were obviously excesses and abuses. But that's one of the distinctions of the school I went to versus the previous school I went to, where there wasn't corporal punishment. So you realize that, and because you're a boarder, there's all sorts of things that go on. There's inspections. You have to make sure your socks are a certain level, and you get punished with physical labor, and it was a very interesting place to be. But one of the advantages of going to boarding school is you're on campus for 3 months every term. So we have, our terms last 3 months, and there's only 3 of them. So as different to here where you have 4 terms, but we have 3 terms. And, you add up all that time being at school, and there's so much you can learn. So a typical day would be school, classes up until midday, then lunch, and then you'd have a rest, and then you'd have prepped, which is homework, and then you'd have sport. And then in the evening you could have choir or plays. So because you're at school, you get this extraordinary opportunity to learn so many new things, and I loved it. I loved boarding school.
Were there other things too, like chapels or anything like that?
Yes. So we used to have chapel service was compulsory. It was on a Sunday. I think in junior school it might have been in the morning, and in the evening it was. In high school it was in the evenings, you got dressed up in your best dress, so you had a blazer and tie and everything. It was a very solemn occasion. It was very English as well, so Anglican church services. Once in a while we'd have those very posh services, evensong or whatever they're called, And it was obviously very regimented. Back in the day, I think it's very different now. This church looks like a modern church, but we had hard pews, and we had kneelers, and we had the English hymnal, and we had pieces of paper, and the priest would say something with that very monotone voice, "Now lettest thou thy servants depart in peace." And we would say, "According to thy word," and all that stuff, We had, and so there were various festivals throughout the year. And so that long story short, became a very familiar way of worship for me, as in, although I felt it was very regimented and stilted, I still learned so much and absorbed it, and I was never anti. I just knew it was part of school life, but I engaged. The wonderful thing is we had lots of different speakers who would come and visit. We had a resident priest in high school, Reverend Father Harold Day, I think was his name. And he used to wear the dog collar and dress up in the robes on special occasions, etc. And he would do the communion as well. But once in a while we'd have guests who would come in from Scripture Union, the Gideon Society, and they'd hand out Bibles. Of course, in Africa, where anything valuable is treasured, you don't just get a Gideon's Bible once, you collect them as a prize. So I had about 4 or 5 in the end, and I thought the more you've got, the better your chances of getting to heaven.
Fair enough.
Youth for Christ would come out as well. In fact, many organizations, and they would come out and, of course, not only tell nice stories, but encourage us to try and live godly lives. They'd introduce us to the gospel story, which was very familiar to me, incidentally. If you go to school for 11 years and you go to compulsory church services for 9 months of every year, you get to understand what Christmas was about and what Easter was about. It's so often drilled into you. But sometimes it's a huge gap between what you know there and what happens here. And so over time, I started to really, especially as I got into my teens, I started to really question life, my worldview, my foundations, all the big questions in life. And philosophers and theologians and people well trained like yourselves would say there are 3 big questions in life, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. Like, basically, where do we come from? Why am I here? And where do I go when I die? We all sort of, I think, as a human race, we're all dealing with those issues at all stages of life. When you're young, it's marvelous and awe-inspiring. When you're older, it's like, where am I going? And in the middle of your life, it's kind of like, let me just enjoy life. And so, but what am I going to do with it? And is it going to count? What career will I take, etc.? And there was a song, actually, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but there was a song I was taught when I was a little boy called Fill the World with Love. Does anyone here remember the song, Fill the World with Love, taken from a movie called Goodbye, Mr. Chips? Some of you, it may ring a bell. Well, let me just, we didn't talk about this, Andrew, but I'll just, if you'll indulge me for a second, I'll just recite it to you. I won't sing it, but I'll recite it to you. No. Calm down, Sydney, calm down. So it goes like this. In the morning of my life, I shall look to the sunrise, at a moment in my life when the world is new. And the blessing I shall ask is that God will grant me to be brave and strong and true, and to fill the world with love my whole life through. In the noontime of my life, I shall look to the sunshine, at a moment in my life when the sky is blue. And the blessing I shall ask will remain unchanging, to be brave and strong and true, and to fill the world with love my whole life through. In the evening of my life, I shall look to the sunset. I'm sorry, but some of you look like you're in the evening of your lives. Just one or two of you, that's all, just one or two of you. Anyway, in the evening of my life, I shall look to the sunset, at a moment in my life when the night is due. And the question I shall ask, only I can answer. Was I brave and strong and true? Did I fill the world with love my whole life through? And I think when you circle back to that question, like, where did we come from? Why am I here? Where do I go when I die? It's all about worldview. It's all about your foundation. Like, how do you think we got here? Is there a creator, or did we just come out of a big explosion? Very, very important questions. So important, in fact, that we will spend, as a world, trillions of dollars to try and figure out if there's water on Mars, yeah? Trying to answer the question, where did we come from? Of course, you don't have to travel too far down this road to understand there are two polarized positions on this. They're the people who believe there's a creator, and not only has the creator revealed himself through the creation, but he's also kind of written it on people's hearts. The Bible says God's placed eternity in people's hearts. So there's a sort of very subliminal understanding that you get life from life, yeah? You don't get life from non-life. Am I right about that? We've never seen life come from non-living things. It doesn't just happen. And so there are these big ideas, these big questions, and on the one hand you've got God, which I'm hearing about in chapel on Sunday. On the other hand, in science on Monday, I'm hearing that actually there's no God. It just happened in a big explosion. And so I'm caught between these two worldviews and thinking, well, whichever one I choose has implications, because if there's a God, I'll live one way, and if there isn't, well, I mean, think about this. If there weren't any police in Sydney, the criminals would run amok, right? If there's no higher authority to keep you accountable, then you just do what you like, and there are no consequences. And so I even as a 13, 14-year-old, understood this. And so it was in exploring all that I became a Christian. In asking, where did we come from? Why am I here? And what happens after it's all over? And so it all culminated in me going to a Christian youth camp. So after all of that, after hundreds of sermons from visitors, and I knew in my head there must be a God. There just has to be, because this world is it's messed up, it's broken, there's death, there's sadness, there's pain, there's disease, there's destruction. But even through all of that, there's this amazing design and beauty in it that makes me go, wow. When you look at we have a little flower in Zimbabwe called a flame lily. Actually, literally looks like a flame. You can go and Google it later. It literally, it's beautiful. It makes you think, wow, wherever that came from, understands symmetry, design, ratios, beauty. And when in Africa, you can really see the night sky, because half the time we've got power cuts, so you can't, there's no light pollution. And it's literally awe-inspiring how grand everything is and how amazing everything just works together. You even learn some of these concepts in biology, right? There's a thing called symbiosis, where one creature needs another creature, or neither of them can survive. And all of it just seems so amazingly well put together, and it just works. There's also the idea that if you tweak things a little bit, then you can't have life. So if we were a little closer to the sun, it would be too hot. A little further, it would be too cold. How come everything is wound up just right? It just seems like everything is just put in place as it should be. So all of that kind of got my attention. And so, cutting a long story short, I went to a Christian youth camp. I was 16, and I was ready. What I mean by that is I was old enough to understand the implications of a decision to either accept Christ or reject him. And so I was at this camp. I heard the gospel message. Simply put, It's the fact that God became a man, born in a manger, and he came with many missions to heal the sick and raise the dead and all that, but ultimately to go to a Roman cross to pay for the sins of the world. I got that, I understood it when I was 16, and I said a little prayer which led to my conversion. And it was amazing. We had a lot of fun and games, but that, I think it was the 12th or 17th of December, can't quite remember, in 1992. That was clearly a moment in my life where I know something very significant happened. And I think we talked about this earlier. I probably had, in one of those scripture union services, asked Jesus into my heart. I'd probably done it 20 times, who knows. But when I was 16, on that day, I said, today's the day. I'm going to make sure that the Bible says God's done his part, right? And I'm not theologically trained enough to understand who's doing what. Because you can get into really murky waters, the whole Calvinists and Arminianists. What I know is God's done his part. And there's a part we have to do, which is to respond. And the Bible commands us to repent. And so when I was 16, I did that. And I trusted Jesus for my salvation, and that's how I became a Christian.
Wow. Dramatic change, too, in your life. You had an
took
opportunity...
a while.
Well, yeah, it took a while. But
yeah.
God eventually got through. Tell us about... you had an opportunity to put your faith into practice at the school within a couple of years, I think, of you becoming a Christian. Can you tell us about what happened there?
So I think some of you may understand what I'm saying when I say I went to a traditional boarding school in Africa. And really what I'm referring to is the fact that part of the rite of passage to become a man was that they used sometimes even violent, they adopted violent techniques. So they used to bully kids. There was a thing called seniority, where anyone who was older than you automatically got your respect, whether they were worthy of it or not. It was just the way the school worked. So there was a lot of stuff like that. And when I say bullying, I mean, some of the senior boys could cane youngsters or punish them by telling them to go and, put their back to the wall and hold the wall, it was called, for like 10 minutes until their legs collapse. Or they could punish you by telling you to run around a track barefoot at 4 in the morning. It was just barbaric stuff. But it was indelibly linked to the idea that because Plumtree toughened you up, that's how you became a man. And I think I remember going on the prefect's camp the year before we were the incumbents. And so we went on this camp, and the camp director happened to be a Christian man. If I'm not mistaken, he was one of the people he was like the leader of Youth for Christ in Zimbabwe or something like that. Or YWAM or one of those. And he was the first person to challenge, and I was a Christian by this stage, 2 years in, like you said. He was the first person to challenge me, because I was the head prefect for the next year, as to whether maybe we should look at changing the culture a little bit. Like maybe you need to question whether that's okay, what you guys are doing. He said, I've heard you guys do this at Plumtree. And the only thing I can compare it to is if you're living in a family and there's some kind of abuse in the family, let's say it's verbal abuse, you really need to go to visit a friend's house where there's none of that. And then you go, so that's not normal. Yeah, right. You need someone to point it out to you. Mm-hmm. And so we just assumed that was part of the school culture, and it toughened you up and it built you into a man. And I think there's no doubt that my high school anyway, Plumtree School, did produce some incredible people. We had captains of industry, we had sports people who played for the country. We had tremendous success, in inverted commas. But the funny thing is, I don't know that they were well-rounded human beings because of the traumas that came. And in fact, some of them, many of them ended up having failed marriages and struggles with social interaction, etc. And so he was the first person to say, can you guys think about changing this? And so I thought, well, let's take it on board. And so we started to push the school towards not allowing that to be part of the culture. And one of the things I did was I taught the school. It wasn't my writings, but I adopted the idea. I got the school to learn what was called the Plumtree Ideal. And the Plumtree Ideal was written by an old teacher, and it used to be printed on parchment paper, and you could buy it at Sports Weekend and hang it up in your study or your office or in the living room. It was a lovely piece of prose. And it went something like this. I'm probably going to mangle it, but it went something like this. A young man with manners, a young man with good manners, of honesty and integrity, respectful of his own and others' property, and respectful of his elders, and in particular those who give of their time for his benefit, proud of himself and of Plumtree, and always willing to acquit himself well when the chips are down. So, although this used to be hung up around the school, no one had actually got the whole school to memorize it. Wow. So you can imagine, I'm in a testosterone-filled hall with boys saying, right guys, we want to do things differently now. We want to be people of integrity. We want to stop bullying, and we want to live according to these ideals. And so I taught the whole school, and of course the 18-year-olds were like, do we have to learn this? But eventually people learned it. And I won't say it changed the culture of the school, but it started something. Yeah. And that was one of the things that I hope was part of our legacy, that we sort of got the ball rolling. Mm. And that, you could ultimately say, was informed by my Christian faith. I don't think I would have thought about it or cared a few years earlier. In fact, the way we behaved as 16, 17-year-olds was like, well, I've been bullied, I can't wait to be the bully. Yeah, of course. It happened to me, it's time for me to pass it on. Yeah.
Wow. Look, let's move ahead, jump quite a few years actually, to even a few years ago. You are also here, and you're going to sing for us tonight.
I am?
Really?
I
believe so. Did you not know that? No, I'm just kidding. A few years ago, you were on The Voice Australia. Tell us, what made you decide to do that?
So, it's kind of a long story, but I'll hit the bullet points. So, I got involved with a charity. I was approached, in fact, no, let me rewind. One of the reasons I came to Australia when I did was because I was invited to speak at the Adelaide Prayer Convention breakfast. It's an annual prayer breakfast, and a lot of heavies come, so a lot of pollies come. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but they came, and the police commissioner and a lot of people involved in big business, etc., would come. And so I was the keynote speaker in 2015. So when I was there was a young lady. Well, I say she's young, but she's probably 60 now. But anyway, that's young lady, yeah.
Be careful, Henry.
Yes, I know. Do you see how yeah. Anyway, so she came and approached me, and she asked me if I would consider being an ambassador for her charity. I said, what's it about? She said, well, we're a prison ministry. I thought, oh, wonderful. What do you do? Well, we go into prisons and we tell prisoners about Jesus. And it's a charity called Second Chances. Now, some of you may have heard of Prison Fellowship. And they both started in it and then kind of went and did their own thing. Very sadly, Jeff, Helen's husband, passed away last year, but he was very much involved in it, and in fact he was an ex-prisoner himself. And so it was a great cause, and I got involved. I'm still their ambassador, and so it got me out there speaking in prisons and etc. Anyway, the police commissioner was a cricket tragic, and he heard that I'm associated with this charity. And he then said, I beg your pardon, not the police commissioner, the police public liaison officer, something like that.
We'll take your word for it.
And he said, wouldn't it be great if we could get the police band, the SAPOL band, South Australian Police Band, to do a gig with Henry? So this was organized, and we did it. We had a gig at the Adelaide Town Hall. 600 people turned up. We had a great concert. It was lovely. I sung a few songs. And obviously someone must have taken a phone out and recorded it without permission. But anyways, I don't care. Anyway, it somehow wound its way onto the internet, and someone who was a scout for The Voice saw it. And they like to do work with the army, the police, the navy, etc. Right. And so long story short, I got a random email from someone, and they said, listen, we've seen a video of you singing. We think you've got a decent voice. Have you ever considered going on The Voice? I was like, oh, no. Stupid reality TV shows. I would never. Why would I, right? Anyway, the other thing is I thought it was ITV the UK, because ITV is a UK-based production company. And the email domain name was ITV. So I said, thanks for asking. It's not really my thing. And the other thing is I'm actually based in Australia, not in England. And she wrote back and said, no, actually, we're in Sydney. Have you considered? Now that gave me food for thought. I thought, oh gosh, okay. So I spoke to some friends, and they all said, you've got to go for it. Come on, go for it. I'm like, but I'm 41, man. Why would they want me? Anyway, I auditioned. So you start off on a website, and then if you get through that process, I think you've just got to answer a few questions about yourself.
Sure.
Then you get through to the next round, where they get you into a hotel, into a little room with 3 judges sitting there, and they say, sing for us. Just like they do on the Pop Idol, X Factor, all of that. They don't film that, though, to broadcast. It's just very intimidating with industry people sitting there. So I sung a couple of show songs in Nessun Dorma or something like that. But let me just paint the picture. It was the Mayfair Hotel in Adelaide, and I was the oldest person by a mile. I was surrounded by teenagers and thought, what am I doing here? Anyway, I was one of the few people to walk out with a piece of paper. If you walk out with a piece of paper, it means you've gone through to the next round. So everyone must have been going, huh? What? This old black dude has just got a white piece of paper. So, but maybe I was just a token sort of box that they needed to tick for diversity. Anyway, I then got through to what was called key check, and eventually got through to the blinds. And at the blind auditions, I got Delta Goodrem, Boy George, and Kelly Rowland to turn. And the one Christian guy who I would have gone with, had he turned, Guy Sebastian, didn't turn.
Oh.
So I was like, Anyways, I made a joke about it on the show. But I got through to the 3rd round. So I sung at the blind, and then I sung again in the knockout, and then I sung in the battles, and I was eliminated by a rapper called Denzel. Oh. He's a good rapper, but I don't sing that kind of music, so there was no competition. The other thing is, in the middle performance, I forgot my words, and they made a big song and dance of it, And gotcha. So it wasn't a flawless campaign by me, but it was good to put myself out there and see where I stood, and I got through to the last 26, which is not too bad for a 41-year-old dude who used to play cricket, know.
It's fantastic. We'd love to put you to the test now, Henry, if that's okay. Would you like to sing for us?
Well, it's up to them, not up to me.
That's right. Well, you sing. I think they would.
They might turn around and say.
That's right. Amazing Grace would be great.
Amazing Grace.
Thank you.
Is there anyone called Grace here, by the way? No one? Well, there was a real good dad joke there. Can I tell you a dad joke before I go? Before I sing the song? Is that okay? Well, it's not really a dad joke, it's just a joke. So there's a guy called Arthur, shall we say. Not really Arthur, but shall we say, because I like you, Arthur. And he was married to a lady called Martha. Look, it rhymes. So anyway, Arthur was in hospital. He was on his deathbed. Wasn't doing too well. And suddenly, poof, he dies. And off he goes to the pearly gates. And he's at the pearly gates, and Peter says to him, listen, mate, it's good you're here. You're in the right place. But the rules have changed a little bit. You've just got to say... you've got to spell a word before we let you in. If you spell the word and you get it correct, you're in. It's just a little test. It's nothing biggie, no biggie. You've lived a good life, but if you don't spell it right, you go to the other place, right? So Arthur says, well, what's the word? He said, well, you can choose. He says, okay, Lord. Okay, go for it. He said, Lord. Well done. Welcome to your eternal habitations, Arthur. So Peter then turns to him and says, listen, mate, I've just got to go and take a pinkle. I bet you didn't know Peter needed to take a pinkle, right? But anyway, he says, can you just man the gate just for a few minutes? And I'll be right back. You know the deal. Just get them to spell a word, and if they pass, they're in. Anyway, 2 minutes later, who comes up the road? But Arthur's wife, Martha. He says, what happened to you? Why are you here? He says, well, I was in such grief when I left the hospital. I wasn't looking left or right, and bang, a bus came and wiped me out. So Arthur said, okay, I'm sorry to say, but the rules have changed a little bit. You've got to spell a word, and if you can't spell it, you're not in. So she said, okay, go on then. He said, you've got to spell schizophrenia. Are you married, by the way, or not? All right, anyway. All right, well... He didn't know I was going to do that. Anyway. Bit of humor is good. So Amazing Grace is, it's got an amazing story behind it. I won't regurgitate it. But tremendous story. William Wilberforce, have I got the right guy? That's Amazing Grace, isn't it? Or I'm not mixing up my stories, am I? Of the slave guy. Or am I thinking of the guy? Yeah, it is the right. Yeah, so it is. Well, yeah, you know. Anyway, a tremendous story. I won't regurgitate it because I'll mangle it. But the way it's been explained to me is what God has done for us is demonstrated two things in Jesus going to the cross. And I'll be simple. One is he's shown us mercy, which is not giving us what we deserve. But he's also given us grace, which is giving us what we don't deserve. I hope I've got that right. But it's tremendous, isn't it, that God just lavishes his goodness on us, even though we don't deserve it. And it's not because we've been a good boy or good girl this year. It's actually because he's good, and he wants to share that goodness with us. And so this song, Amazing Grace, it's applicable to anyone who understands that it's all about what God has done and can do. And I will share the same message with prisoners who are rapists, murderers, and worse. Because it's about God, it's not about us. It's about what he's done, and not about what we've done. Amazing Grace. By the way, Amazing Grace got like 5 or 6 or 7 verses. I'm just going to sing 3. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home.
That's beautiful, Henry. Thank
You're
you.
very easy to please in Sydney.
There's more. So, Henry, so here you are. You've just left school. You've been the head boy. You've got a relatively new faith in Jesus directing you. And along the way, too, you've begun to excel at sport, and in particular, cricket. Can you tell us a bit about how you moved from schoolboy cricket, which I assume some people here have also been very much a part of, all the way up to representing your country in the sport?
Well, I think it all begins with my athletic ability. So, first thing is I did say I was born to a Kenyan dad. Not that my dad gave birth to me, but you understand, right? So I've got a Kenyan dad. And if you know anything about Kenyans, they're pretty good at winning races, right? So there's always a Kenyan at the front of the marathon or the 5,000 or the 3,000, or indeed the election. Remember, Obama won, right? So So Kenyans are good at running, and I discovered at a young age that I could run very fast. So I found a dollar coin in the garden one day, and I said to my brother, I should have handed it in to lost property, but Mom wasn't home.
Fair enough.
So I said to my brother, let's go and catch the ice cream man. So in Zimbabwe in the early 80s, we used to have two big ice cream companies. One was called Dairy Board, and the other was called Lion's Mate. And they both used to have portable ice cream sellers. It was a little box with a dry ice in it and a tricycle, and they'd ride around ringing a bell every day at a certain time. You knew they were coming past. And I knew he'd been and gone, not long, maybe 5 minutes. So I figured he can't be too far down the road, and we kind of knew his route. So I raced my brother to the ice cream man, and I beat my brother. And, more interestingly enough, I was wearing what we call pata-patas in Africa. They're a type of slipper that makes noise when they pat on your feet. You've got a very colorful name for them in this country. You call them thongs, which I think is a bit weird. But anyway, thongs goes both ways. Anyway, I won't dwell on it. But anyway, I beat him in thongs, and he was stunned. He was like, "Wow, you're fast." And he was bigger and taller than me, so he was really surprised that I did. And it was quite a moment for me when my big brother said to me, "Gee, you're fast." It was so affirming. And so I thought, it was just something I put in the memory bank. You mean I'm faster than normal people run? Because you don't know. You don't know if you're good at drawing until you compare yourselves, your drawings to someone else's, and you go, okay, I draw stick men and they draw proper people. So you need that little reference point at some point as you grow up. And so that was number one. Number two, I was at school, maybe 8 or 9 now, and I was walking on my way to the outdoor toilets, about 20 meters from the school block. And I heard this rustling sound to my left. And in Africa, when you hear a rustling sound, you turn very quickly. You investigate, because there are about 10 animals that want to eat you, you understand? So I turned, and I must have been about this tall, and no word of a lie, there was an African spitting cobra that had reared up to the height of my eyeballs.
Oh, wow.
And his hood was spread, and he was ready to strike. All I know is the fear kicked in, the adrenaline kicked in, and 5 seconds later, I was 100 meters away. Now, for those of you who know your athletics, you will know that I probably set the world record that day. I didn't really, but I just knew I was fast because I got out of there so quick. I went and told a teacher, "There's a big snake over there." We're like, "Yeah, talking nonsense. Well, a few days later, it went into their residence.
Okay.
And of course, unlike in the West, what we do with animals that can kill you is we kill them first. You guys put them on an endangered list, and suddenly they're protected. We just kill them. So they killed that snake. But then I knew I could run fast. And then I started doing well in athletics. I started winning Victor Lodorum trophies. I started winning trophies, medals, whatever you want to call them, at inter-schools level as well. And so I knew I was quick. And then at the age of 8, there was there was a 50-year-old Bob Blair, young man, who came out to do some coaching at my school. Bob Blair was a former test cricketer for New Zealand. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about him. One, he played something like 18 test matches and never tasted victory. So he came to my school and coached me, so I can say with confidence that I was coached by a loser. Anyway, no disrespect to Bob. Bob was a man of extraordinary fortitude. Once I heard this story, it made me go, aha, right. So Bob went out to bat in a test match in Johannesburg, round about the 50s, 54 I think it was maybe, after hearing on Christmas Eve that his fiancée had just been killed in a train disaster. He didn't have to bat, and the mainly silent Johannesburg crowd assumed he wouldn't.
Right.
But he turned up and he batted. He tried to save the game for his country, but he failed. So as much as we can laugh about him never winning, I mean, he won big time in the game of life because he showed that he's got extraordinary mettle. Anyway, he showed us how to hold a ball, how to hold a bat. I caught the bug, blow me down. I started playing, and because of my speed, I started getting success. Because if there's one thing that a lot of batsmen don't like, especially 8 or 9-year-old batsmen, is its speed. And I had it in buckets. And so I would take 7 wickets and 5 wickets, 6 wickets per match. It was extraordinary. And so I then made the under-12s national team, and then made the under-18s as well later on. By that stage, when I was 17, 18, I started playing for my province as well, or you would call it the state. So imagine at the age of 17, I was playing for New South Wales in the Sheffield Shield. That's what happened. And before long, I was picked to make my debut 2 months after leaving school. I made my debut against Pakistan, and it was in '95. I was the first black player to play for Zimbabwe. I was the youngest at the time. And it's very tricky to describe what it feels like being the darkest face in the room.
Sure.
I looked around the change room, and everywhere I looked, there was just white faces. It's kind of like tonight, actually.
Yeah.
Except, I see you, brother. I see you there. He thought I didn't see it, but I saw it. There's always one guy who messes up my joke. Where are you from, brother? Sierra Leone. That's good enough. We'll accept you. Anyway, so I then made my debut as I said, the youngest and the first black player, but it was disastrous.
Right.
Although we won our first test match as well, we'd lost or drawn up until then. I got called for throwing. In fact, 3 things happened. The first thing that happened was I got a wicket with my 3rd ball in Test cricket after a horrendous first ball, which went forwards down the leg. So let me try and describe to you what I'm like. People say about my bowling when I used to bowl. I don't bowl anymore. I'm retired. But when I used to let the ball go, they used to say, that Olonga guy, he's so wild, he has no idea where the ball's going, right? I never let it bother me, because I thought, hold on, if I don't know where it's going, how's the batsman going to know, right? So I used to bowl 6 rubbish balls, then out of nowhere I'd bowl a straight one and get a wicket. They were like, where did that come from? A straight ball?
Surprised them.
Yes. So I got a wicket with my 3rd delivery. And then a number of things happened. The first thing was I dropped Inzimam ul Haq. Do you guys remember Inzimam ul Haq? Some of you may. He played for Pakistan, great player. He top-aged a bouncer from a man called Heath Shriek, and I didn't quite catch it. It fell just in front of me, and you can imagine my whole team was mad at me. That's the first thing. Second thing was, I then pulled or tore an intercostal muscle in my rib cage. I have it on good authority, Andrew, that is the most pain you can ever feel in all of life.
Wow.
I think it's even worse than childbirth.
Okay.
Andrew, I've
You've
heard.
done that too?
No, but I've heard they get an epidural. They don't feel a thing. They don't feel a thing.
Chat to the mums later.
I'm joking. I was there at my daughter's births, both of them. It looked painful. Anyway, and then the final thing was I got called for throwing. So this was terrible. For those of you who don't understand what throwing is in cricket, I'll demonstrate. Why does my mic keep cutting in and out? Is there a reason? Is it a wonky cable or? No? Anyway. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I'll keep going. So this is legal. This is fine. Can you all see that? That's fine. Can you see the difference? That's not legal. Can you see the difference? It's a subtle difference, but it's there. Right. So not legal, right? Having said that, if you come from Pakistan or Sri Lanka, you can do what you like. So doesn't apply to them. You've got to be a cricket follower to understand that one. Andrew was with me. Anyway, so I got called for throwing. Now, it's quite embarrassing. It's stigmatizing. It's a whole heap of things. And so that could have been the death knell on my career, actually. It could have ended it before it even began. But for the confidence that a lot of people put in me, I continued. So I got sent off to India to work with a man called Joel Garner and someone else you've probably never heard of called Dennis Lilly. And I worked with them in Madras, which is now called Chennai in India. And I also came here. So that was 95. I came here in 96. And this kind of segues into why I'm here, because on that trip is when I met my wife. But in '96, I went to Adelaide. They had an academy there called the AIS, the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport, Commonwealth Bank Cricket Academy. Quite a mouthful, but anyway, that's the full name. So they'd produced players like Michael Slater and Glenn McGrath and many others. And I was following in their footsteps. Brett Lee was there when I was there in '96. He was just making his steps into the national side. And then, in addition, I worked again with Dennis Lilly and a couple of other people. There's a guy called Richard Doan and Wayne Phillips, so cricket lovers will know who they are. Anyway, that fixed me up, and then the next year I went to South Africa, spent some time in Johannesburg, working at the academy there. On that occasion, it was 6 months. And so, with that remedial training, I was then legal, and then ended up playing 5 more years, if my maths is right, after that. From the start of my career to the end. So 8 seasons in total, 3 seasons of trying to fix things, and then 5 with maybe 2 being a really good purple patch. So long story short, in 30 test matches I took 68 wickets, and in 51 days I took 58 wickets. So a very modest return.
Favourite wicket, before we go any further?
Favourite wicket. I think it has to be Sachin Tendulkar. In a one-day game, I only got him out once, but I got him out twice. So let me explain. So back in the day, you could get a batsman out off a no ball, but you could bowl the next ball and get him out again. Now they've changed the rule such that it's a free hit. So you follow? So it's a free hit now, but back in the day when I played, it wasn't. So what happened was I ran up. In fact, I'd started very well, which was unusual for me. I'd picked up Ganguly with my first ball, and then another great player called Rahul Dravid with my early on in the second over. And then in the third over, Tendulkar was on strike. And I got him to nick off with a pretty decent a nut that sort of angled in towards off stump, but it just seemed away enough it just needs to move a little bit with good players. And so he got an edge, and it was flying to the keeper, and then just before Andy Flower caught it, no ball! And I was like, I hate you, Steve Dunn. But I did overstep, so it was on me, right? So what I didn't say was the night before that match, the backroom staff, the coaches, etc., had said, any bowler who takes a wicket off a no ball is going to pay a fine of $1,000 US.
Wow.
The only problem was my match fee was $1,000. So I was now playing for free.
For free.
So I was so mad at myself that I was going to be playing for free. And by the way, I thought that was such an unfair fine. I mean, the batsmen would run themselves out, cheaply, and they would get no consequences. But anyways, I then got him out the very next ball. So I was so mad, and I just bowled the quickest bouncer I could, and it kind of caught him by surprise, and it bobbled up, and he got caught at City Point by Grant Flower, and so I got 3 wickets. In fact, I got 4 wickets in total, because I got another wicket after that, and I got a run out. So I was man of the match.
Wow.
Anyway, that match was a dead rubber match. It didn't matter, so that's why they picked me. But then they said, well, he's bowled well in that match, let's put him in the final. So they put me into the final, and Tendulkar was mad. Right. He was not happy with the way I got him out the day before. And he made 100 in about 50 balls, and I went for 50 in about 20 balls. So it was carnage. He got his revenge, but easily my best wicket. Twice.
You still got that wicket.
Yeah, twice in 2 balls.
Now, all the cricket lovers here are just salivating. The ones who are not so great on cricket probably, So let's talk about, you had a good career, you've come back, you're in a purple patch, but at the same time in Zimbabwe, as you said earlier, is the Mugabe government. This is all happening in the background while you're playing. So can you tell us, what was it like living in Zimbabwe under his regime?
So in the early days, as a young boy, if you told me Mugabe was a bad man, I wouldn't have believed you, because all we were taught in the school system was that in the bad old days, before independence, there was segregation. And segregation basically looked a little bit like apartheid South Africa. Excuse me. And so what that looked like was black people didn't generally live in the same areas as white people, didn't generally go to the same schools, play in the same sports clubs, drive in the same buses, etc. So very, very similar to 50s in America, I suppose. There were many areas of the world that were like this. And so there was a war, which, as I mentioned earlier, lasted about a decade. And when that came to an end, maybe for the first 10 years of Robert Mugabe's rule, as a young man growing up, I always thought he was okay. However, in the early 80s, there were some noticeable things. Robert Mugabe had a little problem. There was some... Let me explain it this way. Zimbabwe has a number of different tribes. The two main tribes in Zimbabwe are the Ndebele people, and you've then got the Shona people. And the Shona people they're the biggest part of the population. And just to give you some idea of their temperament, Shona people are farmers, and they generally are very peace-loving. They were miners as well. They're very industrious people. The Ndebele people came from the Zulu warriors in South Africa. Does that ring a bell, a Zulu? Do you understand what a Zulu? So the Zulus were very warrior-like. They loved war. They were the kinds of people who thought, why should I work for something when I can just steal it, right? you know what I mean? It's like, why can't I just go and raid those people over there, take their sheep, their cattle, and their corn? And so there was this tribal rivalry that lasted generations, going back maybe hundreds of years. So like the Scots and the English, something like that. Anyway, just because we had independence, as in, okay, black people now had access to schools and hospitals, etc., they didn't before, didn't gloss over this other issue of tribalism. So you had black on black hatred and violence. And Robert Mugabe was a Shona with a long memory. So what started happening was in the armies, the Shona people would be given positions of authority. They would be senior in the army, and the Ndebele people would oftentimes find themselves picked on. And so what happened was one day, a few of these Ndebele people said, nah, I've had enough of this. They're always persecuting us. So they took their guns, and on one or two barracks, barrackses, I suppose I should say, they actually had some fully fledged gun battles. And then these dissidents, as they were called, then fled into the bush and started to try and destabilize the whole country. And Mugabe then sent out a force to deal with them. The Troubles, as they were called, lasted about 3 or 4 years. And there was a lot of destruction. The dissidents caused mayhem. It's estimated they killed about 800 people. But the Mugabe forces that were supposed to stop the dissidents were committing more heinous crimes against humanity and human rights abuses. They killed almost 30,000 people. That's the lower side of the estimate. They would torture people. They would throw people down mine shafts. They were terrible, terrible. Now, I didn't really know about this as an 8-year-old. You don't. I read about a lot of it afterwards. But what I did know was we used to have curfews. So if we went to the big city, we had to be back by a certain time. And all I remember is it's because of the dissidents, you see. So obviously, I got, much later on, late 90s, I'm now, I guess, in my early 20s. I'm starting to, there's an internet, there's a way to research things. I'm starting to ponder, but, back in the 80s, what was that all about? I then talk to my stepmom, who tells me some of her relatives disappeared and were never seen again. And so I'm starting to think, oh, this Mugabe guy ain't so nice. And all these, the forces that went out in his name, he sent them out to quash the Matabidis. Anyway, cutting a long story short, once I started to learn about this, I started to do more research, and I started to become more politically aware. I think when you're young, you just want to get on with your sport and the things that give you joy, but as you start to get older and into your 20s, you start to ponder the bigger issues and injustice and corruption and evil, all those things that you start to witness. You start to at least say, God, this is wrong. Why did this happen? How could this be allowed? And so that started my journey of asking lots of questions, doing a lot of research, and cutting a huge story short. I then met up with a human rights lawyer, and he's the first person who called Mugabe a dictator. I'd never heard that term used to describe him, but it was quite eye-opening for me when he did that. Now, the thing about dictators is they're not the smartest people. And I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way. They literally aren't smart. I'll give you an example. There was a guy called Idi Amin. Do you remember Idi Amin? He was an interesting leader. He was like a military leader in Uganda. And he kicked out all the Asian people, gave them 90 days to leave, and they sort of had to leave. It was terrible. Anyway, I heard he bought a boat, and he christened it, get this, the Idiot. That was a dad joke. He didn't really do that. Anyway, but dictators are terrible people. They do terrible things. They abuse their power. They kill people because they can. And so when that man described Mugabe as a dictator, it got me thinking at least. And so in the end, the journey of my faith informing my conscience, my increasing political awareness, all led to me asking the questions about, whether maybe something ought to be done about speaking out against this injustice. And so at the World Cup of 2003, myself and Andy Flower did a political protest at the World Cup to tell the powers that be in Zimbabwe that we thought they were overstepping the mark. So you might say, well, where does your Christian faith inform that? Well, I was reading the book of Isaiah one day. It's in the Old Testament, and it's a really hard-hitting book. And in chapter 1, verse 17, the prophet's reciting what God's saying, and he says this, contend for the widow and the orphan, rebuke the oppressor. Now, look, I don't know, we could probably all interpret that word oppressor in a different way, but for me, an oppressor is someone who's got lots of power, and he picks on people who don't have it. And there are hundreds of examples of that in the Bible. It's usually a rich king or emperor or something like that. But anyways, that just made an impression on me. Oftentimes I speak to mature Christians, and they'll say something like, I've read the Bible every once in a while for all my life, but on a particular day, a particular scripture just jumped out at me or spoke to me powerfully. And for me, that was one of those moments where I really felt, wow, I really sense this is right. You've got to speak to power that abuses people. And so we did something very simple. We wore black armbands as symbols of mourning the death of democracy. And we also wrote a statement to appeal to the powers that be in Zimbabwe to stop the human rights violations, which by that stage had been going for 23 years. And that's ultimately it. It's a very, very long story, of course, but I've condensed it into my growing political awareness, my Christian conscience, if you will, and of course, just a desire to, hold people accountable at the highest level.
So you did this with Andy Flower. As you said, you could have just lived a merry life as a cricketer, enjoying all the benefits of international cricket players. Your Christian faith informed you to do something about what was going on. Can you tell us what were the ramifications of you and Andy Flower making that protest?
Yeah, sure. And the first thing I'll say is, I don't want you to get the impression that I do this every day. Just go looking for a cause to... I think before the protest, I would say I was a very passionate sports person, and that's where I lived my life. It was all in sport, or the arts, music, performance, etc. And so, and neither do I want you to feel that you've got to somehow prove to God that you'll join him in his causes. Not everyone will do what I did, but you've got your lane, run in it. You know what I mean? That was my lane for a small part of my life. I don't do that now. Now I go into other areas, like, as I mentioned, prison ministry, etc. But for that sliver in time, I felt this is something I needed to do. The consequences were, I first of all got dropped from the side. Then I got kicked out of my cricket club, which effectively kind of ended my career because they wouldn't have allowed me to get picked in any other sides for my province, which is the stepping stone to national selection. In addition, I got death threats. I got dropped from the side as well. So I wasn't playing anymore, and ultimately I had to flee Zimbabwe and go into exile after these death threats came. I'll say we did it in the first match against Namibia in the World Cup of 2003, and then by the end of the tournament, I'd basically lost everything. And I had a young lady I was engaged to that came to an end. I had property and homes and investments in Zimbabwe. That I lost all of that. But so righteous was the cause, and so strong was our belief it was the right thing to do, that we sort of saw it through. And the reason I guess that you could say that I did that, well, like people say, what motivated you? Why would you be so prepared to do this, to lose everything? Well, it's kind of simple in the sense that I've always felt that eternity is much more important than what we can get in the temporal life that we have here. I'm not saying go and throw everything away, but there's a kind of a principle. There's a young man who actually comes to Jesus, isn't there? And he says, I've done everything. What more can I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says to him, sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. So there's something to be said for being prepared, at least in your heart, that if God says go here or do this or go there, at least the willingness is there. And so I then was saved through divine intervention is the only way I can put it. Two quick stories, and then I'll sort of wrap that up. But the first one was, after the death threats, if I stayed in Zimbabwe and we got eliminated from the World Cup, Lord knows what would have happened to me. I could have been thrown in prison, trumped up charges, they could have had me done away with, I could have just disappeared, or, who knows? I don't know. But stuff like that has happened to people. So we had one more match to play against Pakistan, and if we won it, we'd go through to the next round, which was the Super Sixes, which were all being held in South Africa, which would mean I leave Zimbabwe, at least for a time, and then I can decide what to do next. Or we get a draw. If we got a draw, we would go through because we would have what was called a superior net run rate than Pakistan and England. And you would understand net run rate, but it's basically, we scored a little quicker throughout our other matches than they did. So we need all you need to know is we needed a win or a draw. And if we get a win or a draw, my life is preserved because we leave the country. Well, blow me down. The night before our final match, I did what every believing Christian would do. I got on my knees and I said a very theological prayer. I said, God, help. And I said a bit more, of course. I said, Lord, I think I heard you here. I need your help. I'm in trouble. No one else can save me. Something like that, Anyway, long story short. And you can verify this on Wikipedia. But overnight, there was a cyclone called Cyclone Japheth. Or Japhet. Japhet moved almost in a straight line westwards towards Bulawayo, where we were playing. You can go to Wikipedia and download the image that tells you where the cyclone moved. It moved inland all the way to the city where we were going to play the match, and it rained all day, and we got a draw.
Incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Now, someone will come to you and say, well, how does that work? There was destruction and animals dying and people... I don't know. All I'm saying is, that's above my pay grade. All I'm saying is, I needed a miracle and something extraordinary happened. The second thing is, I was in South Africa and I needed some money to buy an air ticket to get to England. I'd given an interview on CNN, on TV, and a man had seen it. Prior to that interview, I needed to buy an air ticket. I'd gone to an ATM, which was about a kilometer away from where I was staying. And I'd need to do this every day, because I'm sure anyone who's used an ATM knows there's a maximum you can pull out per day. And I needed enough for an air ticket overseas, so I needed to do this 15 times, perhaps. So maybe on day 7, I was just standing at the ATM pulling the money out, and I just thought in my heart, it would be easier if someone just bought me a ticket. I took my money, I walked home, And either that day or the next day, I got a text message, a voicemail message. And the voicemail message went something like this. It was a South African man. He said, "Hello, Henry, I've seen you on TV, and I want to help you. So I want to talk to you." So Vernon calls me up, and I didn't know who to trust at that. I was in hiding. But I just had a nice feeling about him. So I got in touch with Vernon, and he said, "I'd like you to come to my offices and meet a man. We just like your story, and we want to help you." Long story short, walked into the office, there's pictures on the wall of a man standing next to George Bush Jr., then standing next to George Bush Sr., and I was glad there wasn't a photo of him standing next to Mugabe. But I thought, he's a very connected man. Anyway, he walked in. His name was David Tokoff, a very tall man with a goatee, an American man. And the first thing he said to me was, "Are you the guy who ticked off Mugabe?" I said, "Yes, sir, that's me." He said, "I want to tell you two stories." He said, one, I was young, I had a young family, and I lost my job, and I had a big deal, and it fell through. I needed $5,000, and someone came and he gave me $5,000. He said, "I don't want you to pay me back, I just want you to pass it along. So the next person you see in need, you just pass it along." He said, "The second thing is, I was in Zambia, and there was, the president of Zambia wanted half of my airline company. And I said no to him, and he said, 'Okay, I'll throw you in jail.' So he said, I had to flee, just like you. I know what it's like." And then he turned around and he said, "I know you need to leave the country, because you said that in your interview. Listen, I own an airline, and I'll fly you to wherever you need to go in the world." Wow. And my jaw hit the floor for the second time in a couple of days. And so there was very much a favor that was resting me on that. I didn't even pray to God, "God, could you get me an air ticket?" I just thought, wouldn't it be neat if someone just bought me a ticket? And so he said, "You come back on Tuesday or Monday or whatever it was, and Vernon will buy you a ticket and you'll fly to London." And so I did. And that's how I went into exile. That's how I left South Africa. And so thus started my new life in England. But that's the armband protest, and there were some terrible consequences. But I tell you what it did do for me, is it enabled me to go on a great adventure with God. You know, all the great people in the Bible, when I say great people, there's many, but I'll just think of someone like, say, Joseph. You look at all the hardship that he had to face, but what an adventure, hey? Tremendous. I mean, like, there was a lot of heartache and pain and sacrifice and loss, but wow, what a life. Extraordinary, you know, thrown in the pit, rejected by his brothers, into slavery, Potiphar's wife, dreams. I mean,
he certainly lived, didn't he?
Wow. And I think that's a much more exciting life than rather living in the safe lane. And now, by the way, I'm not suggesting you go out there and risk it all, but I'm just saying, what it's taught me is that God is dependable. If you join him in what he's doing, man, not only does he pay the bills, but wow, what a way to live. You know, it's much more exciting than the humdrum of just being in the rat race and trying to just pay your bills and survive. And there we circle back to, why am I here? Why am I here? Where do we come from? Why am I here? Where do we go when it's all over? And so for me, that all started a journey, actually, leaving Zimbabwe, going to England, of my development into an evangelist. You know, this person you're seeing today would not have happened if I had just continued playing cricket. I'd probably have gone into the system, become a coach, or become a commentator, and there probably wouldn't have been anything stopping me from doing things like this by trying to point people to God. But in a weird way, I think it's the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to come to know God in a personal love relationship with him. And then we're supposed to say, "Okay, God, here I am, send me. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do?" And when we do that, you know, it might not suddenly become crystal clear, but maybe a door will open here or an opportunity will present itself there. And in those moments, just know, it may be scary to start with, but wow, what a way to live. Because when you see God come through in miraculous provision or divine intervention, it just strengthens your faith. It really does.
Yeah. Now, Henry, you're going to sing for us again, and this song is about the Lord's Prayer. And it made me think in the Lord's Prayer where it says, "Give me today my daily bread." You've just told us that he's more than provided everything you needed through that whole experience, but we'd love to hear you sing that.
I'm still broke and still a struggling musician. But
did everyone hear that tonight?
but no, absolutely. Yep, sure. So this is the Albert Hay Melotti version of the Lord's Prayer. I think Arthur knows this one. He's just been singing along with everything that I've sung tonight. And I really do honestly love people like Arthur because they love the old traditional stuff. And so tonight's all traditional stuff. I do sing modern sort of songs, but tonight is just a night where I'm trying to sing songs that make you think. So the Lord's Prayer really should be called the Disciples' Prayer because we're the ones who say it, not him. But I hope it'll bless you. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Thank you so much, Henry. This is extraordinary. One final question for you tonight before you sing again for us. Just letting you all know, telegraphing that. Going back through the night and what you've shared with us, you've talked about, early life and the disappointment with your father. You've talked about boarding school. You've talked about God reaching into your life and bringing you into new life with him as a 16-year-old. You've talked about putting your faith into practice almost straight away as the head boy at your boarding school. You've used your God-given talents on the international arena in cricket. You've stood up for the poor and the oppressed by making that protest with Andy Flower and paid the price for that. And then you've found new life, firstly in England, then in Australia. And as you've said, you've had this great journey with God along the way. My question is, what do all of those things at the end of the day mean to you? All those achievements that you've seen in your life, all the way back from the cricket days to even The Voice and even continuing today. What's your motivation for everything, and what do all those achievements mean for you?
Well, I think from a...
We'll give you some time to think that through.
I mean, I can speak without a mic.
Won't take long.
Oh, that's there. Okay, so... now I've lost my train of thought. It got derailed. That's okay. So from a purely secular, humanistic point of view, I think I just want to live life to the full. Do you know what I mean? It's like if God indeed does dish out gifts and talents, you want to use them to the full, right? So when I was growing up, I heard the phrase that the grave is the richest place on earth because therein lies all the unfulfilled potential of the world. And so all of us are given stuff, gifts here or there, some given more than others. And I think the parable of the talents hints at the idea. It's not talking about talents, it's talking about money, but hints at the idea that there's a certain investment made in us, and we're supposed to get that investment, polish it, and make it more than it was. That's the general gist I get out of it, is that we're all given an investment of some kind, a deposit. And so for me, I've always wanted to be faithful to whatever God-given gifts, if I can put it that way, that I've been given. So music, sport, I've got a love for photography, art. I do lots of things. And I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. So I do all of them kind of equally, averagely, but I love doing them, and they bring me tremendous joy. They fulfill me. But all of those things have a weird, anticlimactic emptiness at the end of the day. So even when I won matches for my country, and I'd been working against having a bad technique, and I was left out of the side, and I was disappointed, and then I came back and I fought back and I trained for 6 months in the gym to get strong enough. And even when I did it, when I proved to the doubters and the haters that I was actually good enough to play at that level, there was still, in a weird, perverse way, an emptiness attached to it. Now, I'm not the only person you'll hear say this. You will hear some millionaires say this as well. People who've got everything material that you think life could ever throw your way. Now, they might not say it to the general public, but in their quiet moments, they make admissions to people. It's not all it's cut out to be. Because at the top, now you're worried about people wanting to steal your money and scam you out of it. And it has all sorts of other issues attached to it. And so you could say this for anyone who's tried to fill their lives with stuff or things or achievements. In fact, arguably, one of the greatest kings in the Bible, a guy called Solomon, did this. He did all sorts. He did projects. He built things. I mean, he was tremendous. He was wealthy beyond our imagination. And then at the end of his life, he kind of says it's all meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. And so there's that as well. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's pointless. I'm just saying at the deepest level, humanity, all of us, we're looking for a number of things. I think one of the things we're all looking for is unconditional love. Is that fair enough? We get angry when we don't get it. We can even get angry at God or angry at our families or whatever, but we all want someone who just loves us just for who we are. Because we all know our own weaknesses. I know I'm a sinner. I may be described as this guy who gave up this, but I know in my own, I know where I fall short. I know I'm not perfect, and so do you. We all are aware of our own shortcomings. We judge ourselves. Women have got a big problem with this. They look in the mirror and I don't like this, I don't like this. I wish I could have a bit of nip and tuck, Guys are different. They're like, man, do I earn enough for my family? Am I a good father? Do I have enough prestige in my community? Do people look up to me? Do they respect me? So we've all got stuff and yet, here we have this extraordinary claim in the Bible that the God of creation actually doesn't care about all that. But he does. He is unconditional love. God is love. The Bible says God is love. And he's actually the one being in the whole universe who says, look, I want you to be good at your cricket, and I want you to be good at your singing, and I want you to give everything your best. But listen to me, kid. If you didn't do that stuff, I'd still love you. Because I'm your dad. I'm your father. I made you. But all I ask is that you come into a personal relationship with me. And I leave the choice up to you as to whether you'll do that. And so there's this interesting tension between living our best life on earth, but yet looking beyond it. And so at the end of the day, if I'm standing before the Creator, if he turns out to be real, now listen, you atheists out there, or unbelievers, if there may be anyone here who's like that, I don't know that there is a God. I honestly don't. I've seen some things that happened, but there was no visible being that came and showed me it was him who did it. It was just circumstances seemed to line up to an answered prayer. That's all I can say. It may be that God doesn't exist, but if he does, when I stand before him, do you really think he cares that I took 6 for 19 against England? Okay, maybe he does care about that one. But seriously, do you think he cares if you're a billionaire, if you've amassed a great fortune? I mean, he owns the whole universe. He owns everything. Billions of dollars is nothing to him. It's short change. Do you think he cares if you got a #1 hit? Or if you were the most beautiful person in the world voted by GQ readers? Or whatever you think success is. 600 wickets, Shane Warne. Or, I don't know, getting on TV, Steve Irwin, or whatever, whoever your heroes are, becoming a politician. God's not impressed by any of that. What I've discovered is that the highest, in fact, Jesus answers this in the Bible. He says this in the book of John. He says, the work of God is to believe in the one he has sent. Isn't that extraordinary? It's not to become rich, wealthy, famous, any of that. And that's what the world says. This is achieving. This is what you want. And all the people who've done that are put on big billboards, and they're exalted in our eyes. And yet, the Bible shows a very different picture. It says the first shall be last, the lowly shall be lifted up. And so, what I've learned is that all the things that the world seems to suggest are the best things, the things to go after. I mean, right now we're in the middle of a human sexuality crisis. There's it's like almost everything depends on what your sexual identity is. Like everything. Like the whole purpose of life is to say I'm a this or I'm a that. Sure. And I think there's much more. There's much more on offer, and the much more is to know God. And so all of the things, the voice. I mean, I didn't win it. Even if I had won it. Would it make me a better person? Would it make me an amazing? No, of course not. None of these achievements or goals, or even playing for my country, all of that is all really forgotten when you think of Judgment Day. So if Judgment Day will happen, and you stand before God, I believe, I don't know, I'm not a prophet, I haven't traveled into the future, but I believe, according to the Bible, that God is going to have a couple of things that are really uppermost in his mind. And he says it this way. Jesus says that there are sheep and there are goats. There's goats over there and sheep over there. Sheep on his right, so I guess there. And he says to the sheep, he says, I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison and you visited me. And they're all going to go. Now, I've read the story, so I'm not going to do that because I know how the story goes. But they're all going to go, Lord, when did we do this, right? He said, well, when you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. And then he moves on to the next group. And basically, how we treated the lowliest of human beings is how we treated God. And he moves on to them and he says, you didn't do these things to me. And they have a terrible end to their existence. Terrible. And so we kind of discussed this earlier. For me, the sum total of life, to know that you've lived a life well lived, is this. God said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. All the law hang on these two. And so for me, that's what I try to do. So when I do visit prisons, it's much more fulfilling to me as a human being to share the gospel to people who think the world has rejected them, doesn't care about them, and there's no forgiveness for them, To say, no, but God loves you. I know what you did is wrong, but we're all sinners. We're all in the same boat. That to me is much more fulfilling than getting Sachin Tendulkar out, I think. And interestingly enough, I will never know the real result of me standing up in a prison and sharing Christ. Because I don't know if anyone says, okay, I want to receive Jesus today. I actually don't know. But the fact that I'm on mission with God is much more fulfilling. The fact is, maybe when I shared once, maybe one person changed and decided to follow God. And the Bible says that all of heaven rejoices when one sinner repents. So there's this great party, there's this great significance in heaven when someone is hellbound and turns around and goes towards God and is saved. And that to me is where I want to spend my energy. It's much more fulfilling, much more satisfying, because that's of eternal value, whereas everything I do here is temporary. So that's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to the great city, where the streets are gold.
Now, Henry, you're about to sing for us, but we have a mutual friend, David Mansfield, who was going to interview you tonight, but a couple of weeks ago was diagnosed with very serious stage 4 melanoma cancer, so couldn't be here tonight. But I think we both know that he would be saying to anyone tonight who is in that position, who is that one person, if there is someone here tonight who has really responded to what you've been saying about your faith and what you feel about life, that they might want to consider him tonight too, consider Christ. So can I say, if there is anyone like that here tonight who may be in that position, as Henry comes up to sing The Holy City, his final song, this may be a really good opportunity for you to have a conversation with God yourself. And as Henry suggested, it might be time to tell the truth to him and say, look, I think I've been living away from you and chasing the wrong things, and it's got me nowhere, and it's time for me to have a chat with you. So we're delighted that you're going to sing again, I do encourage anyone tonight who is in that boat to have that conversation with God. So thank you, Henry. Looking forward to hearing you.
Could I have a little more level on the phone? It's just a bit low on the last one. Last night I lay asleeping, there came a dream so fair. I stood in old Jerusalem, beside the temple there. I heard the children singing, and ever as they sang, methought the voice of angels from heaven in answer rang. Methought the voice of angels from heaven in answer rang. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, lift up your gates and sing, Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna to your King. And then methought my dream was changed, the streets no longer rang. Hushed were the glad hosannas, the little children sang. The sun grew dark with mystery, the morn was cold and chill, as the shadow of a cross arose upon a lonely hill. As the shadow of a cross arose upon a lonely
Jerusalem, hark how the angels sing, Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna to your King. And once again the scene was changed, new earth there seemed to be. I saw the holy city beside the tideless sea. The light of God was on its streets, the gates were open wide, and all who would might enter, and no one was denied. No need of moon or stars by night, or sun to shine by day. It was the new Jerusalem that would not pass away. It was the new Jerusalem that would not pass away. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, sing, for the night is o'er. Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna forevermore. Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna forevermore.
Thank you.
Well, Henry, it's been, I hope you'll all agree, an absolute delight to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your life story and sharing us about, in very raw terms, about what's been happening to you over the years, and also the God that supported you through all of those years. And as I said, if there is anyone here tonight who's responded to what Henry's been saying, Henry's going to stick around. Behind me there is a table, and as you can see, Henry's a very bashful and quiet kind of person. And so he didn't want to say to you that he has actually recorded music. He's got something called Henry Olonga Sings Classical. And I actually took the liberty of grabbing one. There you go, there it is there. And he's going to be at the table if you'd like to buy one of these. I think they're $15. He's also got a USB stick with 5 album projects of yours. So that's basically lots and lots and lots of songs, right? I think that's basically it.
You can play in the car. There's a lot of cars on CD players.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'm sure there's some CD players here. Or USB. So come and have a look at those. But even if you absolutely hated his music tonight, you will be supporting his ministry. So please come and have a chat. And even if you don't want to buy music, come and have a chat to him and get... You know, we haven't got much longer with him. We've only got another 15 minutes or so. So please come and have a chat. Thank you all. There is some tea up the back too if you'd like to have a cuppa. And please would you give Henry a big round of applause.